Have the friends taken polygraphs?
Well, from my understanding, all but I believe one took a polygraph, and from what was told to me that they all passed, and all of the ones that took a polygraph took one without a lawyer. And they cooperated with law enforcement. So from my understanding, everybody took the polygraph test.
Why do you say that's from what you understand? Did they tell you they took a poly and passed?
Yes, ma'am. They told me that they did it. I wasn't there. So that's what I'm saying from my understanding.
To clear up this matter, have your clients taken polygraphs? First to you, Tyler Cox.
Nancy, my clients have not taken a polygraph test.
We believe that Nolan likely died on July the 4th. Let's start with the day that Nolan's body was found and that you ended up at the coroner's office. Start at the beginning.
Early that morning, I deployed some resources. I deployed an aircraft and I received a phone call. Received that phone call from the sheriff's department that a body had been found. Didn't say who it was. I then received a phone call within minutes after the conversation from the sheriff's office from Nolan's mother, Christine, and she was frantic. That mother's intuition, she knew what was going on. She said that they had found him, that they had found a body. My biggest concern at that exact moment was to make sure that she was safe, that she had, a safe way to get there, because it was the beginning of what's more than likely to be the worst day of her life.
Do you know why Nolan's mother wanted you to go with her to Horn Island?
So we had communication. She called me, literally called me. We had a voice conversation that Sunday morning, about 7 o'clock, 7:30. She had called and asked for some assistance, after that phone call. And that's not uncommon for families to call us. What kind of assistance did she need? Find my son.
Here's something interesting I found from an Ed Seward, who appears to be part of the United Cajun Navy search team on the day they found Nolan. He says, day one, we analyzed social media, looked at where we thought the boys were anchored, listened to multiple accounts, and kept working the currents alongside multiple boat owners from the Mississippi Gulf Coast. Several of us were out into the early hours of the morning on July 5th, hoping to find Nolan clinging to a piece of floating debris. And do you want to know something? Not one person said he's black, he's African American, not one mention. What we said was, let's bring this precious boy home to his family. I remember talking that night with local pilot Sean Burdett, who's graciously with the Cajun Navy in Trail, flew his aircraft and burned his own fuel to fly a flight path he and I planned together, based on where we believed Nolan would be by daybreak on the 6th, still clinging to hope. Not once did race come into it with Sean either. Nolan was one of ours and we were going to find him. I remember that morning, Sean climbing to 1,000 feet to use the Starlink on his aircraft and to tell the Coast Guard to suspend all efforts. Nolan had been found washed up on the North Horn Island. We all said a silent prayer for Nolan, for his family, and for his friends. Again, not once did skin color play a role in our efforts, not one time. Now we see this family turning to voices known nationally for stoking racial division, seeking help with what's being called an injustice. Protests are being scheduled in our quiet, peaceful towns. Meanwhile, our community is being painted on. I get it. Now, here's my thing. Nobody said that what happened to Nolan was based on race. But the way the justice system is covering it up, the reason the family had to get a second autopsy is what makes it about race. And you shouldn't be angry for Ben Crump. He is a civil rights attorney who defends people's rights that have been violated. Without him, we never would have known about Ahmaud Arbery and brought his killers to justice. So if you truly don't have a racist bone in your body and believe that you don't see skin color, which is crazy to me, then you should be all for his family doing what they need to find justice for Nolan Xavier Wells. No justice, no peace.
And this is the part for me where I felt like Nancy asked the question that we all have been wanting to know is,
it's wet sand. He's not out in the water, Jeff Gentry. What does that mean, if anything?
Really abnormal. I would have a ton of questions in that case. I would wonder if there's no waves, no strong current. Why is that body up on a shore? How did it get there?
How does Nolan, because I made several videos about this early on when Nolan was found. How was Nolan found on the sand? How did he get on the sand? Because again, when you look at the United Cajun Navy, when they were, obviously recording and looking for him, how did Nolan get on the sand? And I just love that she asked that question. And I mean, the investigator responded in a manner that we already knew. It was evident that this was not right. This did not look right.
Jeff, I'm looking right now at the photo of his body. And it's about, the beach is flat. And I would say it's about 3 to 4 feet from where there's nothing but sand, no water. It looks like it's just as the watering, like you could walk in it very easily and your ankles may not even get wet. He's not out in the water at all. On the beach and on wet sand. That's the way to put it. It's wet sand. He's not out in the water, Jeff Gentry. What does that mean, if anything?
That's really abnormal.
Wait, so it turns out the Snapchat information is really the key to bust this case wide open. Nolan's friend's mom just came out speaking on something that was odd with the Snapchat location her son and Nolan shared. This is crazy. Listen to this. Tell me what you think, but I'm going to tell you what don't make sense about this situation. And I don't like it. Listen.
Now, here's the weird thing to me. This is what stands out to me the most. When we found out that Nolan was missing, my son immediately snapped him, and then Christine messaged him back and said, "I have Nolan's phone now." This was at 12:53, according to the screenshot that I have. It was at 1:53 in the morning. Okay. Mm-hmm. So he, for whatever reason, I don't know if I don't know why he took the screenshot, to be honest.
Found at the local coroner who goes and picks up the bodies was by the name of Bruce Linden Jr., and he was the first person who actually laid eyes and touched Nolan Wells. He comes from a lineage, baby, of serious, deep down, dirty South racism. Okay, let's move on. Now we also know that he was the one who handed the Nolan Wells' body over to the chief medical examiner, Stacey Turner. I did a whole video on her, like I think the second or the third day when Nolan was found. And she, if y'all go back and look at it, it's the second video, but she has a history of listing Black men's death, even if it was homicide, as undetermined, accidental, or suicide thereafter. Okay. I also found, now as far as Judge Ashley and Bruce Linden Jr., they do not work together. They're not partners. They're not anything outside of or associates outside of the workplace. I didn't find anything on that, but I will tell you that they are both officials operating within the same relatively small Jackson County legal and government system. I'm just saying. So you already know.
Wet sand. He's not out in the water, Jeff Gentry. What does that mean, if anything?
It's really abnormal. I would have a ton of questions in that case. I would wonder, if there's no waves, no strong current, why is that body up on a shore? How did it get there? And just like when we're looking at blood evidence or other forms of evidence, if something is in a certain position within a scene, you have to question how it got there. I've investigated a lot of deaths, bodies in canals, rivers, lakes, large bodies of water, never really near the ocean, to where you would expect somebody to wash up to shore. But in these cases, even though there's strong current, waves, large bodies of water, I've never really seen bodies up on a shore, especially up out of the water enough to where they could decompose significantly to where they can't be identified or can't be fingerprinted. So that would be a very big question that I would have in this case, is with the absence of waves, with the absence of a strong current, how in the world did this 19-year-old man end up on shore out of the water?
The last couple of days, you've heard me say that the family is waiting for the district attorney to get in touch with them to schedule that joint investigation and cell phone extraction. We just found out on August 13th, which was literally just 2 days ago, that said District Attorney Mickelrath of the Jackson County, Mississippi, decided to send another letter to the family stating, you have 48 hours to drop off the cell phone. I'm sorry, is that the same thing as a joint investigation when the words are, you have 48 hours to drop off the cell phone, or you have 48 hours to, possess the cell phone for us? Is that the same thing as saying we're going to have a joint investigation? Don't you worry, I'm going to show you the letter right now. Here is the actual letter sent from A.R. Smith, the same attorney that sent out the letter on August 11th. I want to point your attention to right here. To date, Nolan's parents remain willing to facilitate an appropriate forensic examination of Nolan Wells' phone, including FBI involvement, according to our agreement on July 15th. However, your letter sent to Eric Hertz on August 12th at 12:51 p.m. set a deadline for Wednesday to deliver the phone to your office by August 14th at 9 a.m. This is not practical for a number of reasons. Now, that's a 2-page letter. I just showed you one of the excerpts, but the reason why it's not practical is 2 big reasons. And again, this is in that actual letter if you guys want to look it up. The first reason was that you agreed that there would be a joint investigation into the cell phone extraction investigation, but you're saying you need to drop the phone off at the office on August 14th at 9 a.m. That doesn't strike me as a joint investigation. That strikes me as, give us the phone, we'll go through it, and then we'll get back to you later. The second reason why it's impractical is because at the time, the Wells family was actually nowhere near Mississippi or nowhere near an area where they could actually drop it off and be compliant with that deadline. So those are 2 main reasons why. Now again, you guys can read the letter yourself, but this now makes sense. This is why the family is so concerned, and this is why the family is so upset. Because the DA now is essentially going back on what they said, saying, we want you to drop off the phone on August 14th, when on July 15th, they said, we will do a joint investigation together. This is why the Wells family is so frustrated with this investigation. And this is why they're trying to get the Department of Justice involved. This is why all the leadership are getting involved in this, is because the family was under the expectation that the district attorney in Jackson County, Mississippi, was going to do a joint investigation based on the July 15th meeting. We just found out they may not want to do a joint investigation anymore. They're asking the Wells family to drop off the phone on August 14th at 9 a.m., which is already passed. But still, just drop off the phone. That's not the same as offering a joint investigation.
A phone doesn't lie. It doesn't forget where it's been. It doesn't change its story when a lawyer walks into the room. It doesn't decide at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night to suddenly become unreachable. A phone either has signal or it doesn't. It either moves or it stays still. And on the night of July 4th, 2024, Nolan Wells' phone was doing something that nobody in an official uniform has been able to explain. It was moving. Without him. He was 18 years old. He got on a boat with his friends to celebrate Independence Day on the Gulf Coast. He watched fireworks. He laughed. He was alive. And then, somewhere between the water and the shore, between the island and the mainland, between one version of events and the next, Nolan Wells ceased to exist in any official record. No search launched at midnight. No boat impounded. No missing person report filed while it still mattered. Just a group of young men, a phone that kept traveling, and a story that kept changing every time someone asked a follow-up question. What you are about to watch is not a rumor. It is not speculation dressed up as justice. Every claim in this video is anchored to phone records, GPS data, recorded interviews, and the exact words spoken by the people who were last with Nolan Wells when he was still breathing. And those words? They don't add up. They never did. But for 6 weeks, nobody with a badge and a subpoena seemed particularly interested in that problem. We are going to fix that today. Before we go any further, we need to be direct with you. This case involves the disappearance and presumed death of a young man under circumstances that are deeply troubling. The content ahead includes discussion of institutional negligence, racial bias in law enforcement, and details surrounding a death investigation that may be disturbing to some viewers. If that is not something you are in a position to engage with right now, we understand. Come back when you are ready. But if you are staying, we need your full attention because this case demands it. If you are new to Unsolved Files, this channel exists for one reason. We track the cases that fall through the cracks. The cases where the official version of events does not survive contact with the actual evidence. The cases where someone's child, someone's brother, someone's friend, deserves more than a 2-paragraph incident report and a silent phone. We do not look away. We do not move on. Subscribe now so you never miss when we go deep on a case like this one. And drop a comment below telling us where in the world you are watching from. This case has caught attention far beyond Mississippi, and we want to know how far this story has traveled. Now, let's talk about what really happened on Horn Island. Before Nolan Wells became the center of a case that would raise questions far beyond a missing person investigation, he was simply an 18-year-old with a life that was moving forward. Nolan Xavier Wells was a resident of Ocean Springs, Mississippi, and a young man whose identity was closely connected to football, family, school, and the people who knew him best. To those around him, he was not defined by the circumstances that would later surround his name. He was a son, a teammate, a student, and a friend. At Ocean Springs High School, Nolan played football, building the kind of relationships that often extend beyond the field. His head coach, Jake Bramlett, remembered him as the kind of son, teammate, and friend every coach hopes to have in a program. It was a description that focused less on statistics or accomplishments and more on character. That same impression came from Dr. Jacob Dykes, the principal of Ocean Springs High School. He described Nolan as a remarkable student and an extremely kind and hardworking young man. Those words help establish something important about Nolan before the questions surrounding his death begin. There was a person at the center of this story whose life had already made an impression on the people around him. Nolan had also continued his education and football career at Southwest Mississippi Community College. There, his presence was remembered at an institutional level. College president Dr. J. Stephen Bishop said the campus loved Nolan, another indication of how widely his absence would eventually be felt. At home, Nolan remained part of a close family. His mother, Christine Wells Wansley, and his father, Elmore Wansley, would later become the people most determined to understand what happened to their son. But before that, there were ordinary expectations for an 18-year-old preparing for another season of football. Elmore later recalled that Nolan was expected to return home after the July 4th holiday and begin training for the upcoming football season. There was a schedule ahead of him. There were people expecting to see him again. His life was not ending in some planned departure from everything familiar. He was supposed to come back. That detail matters because it establishes the starting point for everything that follows. Nolan had somewhere to be, people waiting for him, and a future already taking shape. At that moment, nobody had reason to believe anything was wrong. On the morning of July 4, 2026, Nolan left with friends for a day on the water. He was 18 years old. He was expected home. And when he got onto that boat that morning, nobody around him knew that it would become the last ordinary beginning of his life. By late morning on July 4, 2026, the holiday had taken on the kind of atmosphere that makes a day on the Gulf Coast feel almost suspended in time. The boat carrying Nolan Wells had left a private dock in the Ocean Springs area at approximately 9:56 a.m., according to GPS data from the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources. About an hour and 18 minutes later, at 11:14 a.m., the vessel reached the western tip of Horn Island. Horn Island is not an ordinary beach destination. It is a federally protected barrier island several miles off the Mississippi Gulf Coast, separated from the mainland by open water. National Park Service documentation describes an environment without staff, drinking water, shelter, conventional facilities, or communication infrastructure. That isolation would later become an important part of understanding the day. But at 11:14 that morning, the island was not empty. Roughly 300 people had gathered there for the holiday, many of them former high school classmates of Nolan and his friends. Boats had brought groups across the water, turning a remote stretch of coastline into a crowded holiday gathering. Traces Tin Shepherd was already on the island when Nolan's boat arrived. Nolan called him for help finding a place to anchor, and Traces Tin later confirmed that he spent much of the day with Nolan and the larger group. The available accounts describe a social day rather than a tense one. People were swimming, talking, drinking, and moving between groups. Witness accounts referenced in preliminary Mississippi Department of Marine Resources material indicate that Nolan was observed drinking with the group. A July 5th document sent to search crews also referenced significant alcohol consumption among people who had been on the island. That detail would later become relevant to the official theory that Nolan drowned accidentally, but at this point in the timeline, it was simply part of the documented circumstances surrounding the holiday. There was also another person whose account would become important: Katie. According to the account publicly surfaced from Katie, Nolan told her that he was getting back on the boat and heading home with his friends. That version does not match what Nolan's friends later said. Their account was that Nolan had decided to remain on Horn Island because he wanted to spend more time with Katie. It is a seemingly simple disagreement about what Nolan intended to do next, but it matters because the difference places Nolan's final known decision in two completely different contexts. Was he preparing to leave the island with his friends? Or had he deliberately decided to stay behind? Nolan's parents, Christine Wells Wansley and Elmore Wansley, have publicly identified that contradiction and said it remains unresolved. The day also produced footage that would later attract attention. A video referenced in reporting by TMZ was captured at approximately 11:17 a.m. and showed the Mac Daddy boat in the area. Another clip carries metadata indicating a time of approximately 2:23 p.m. In that footage, a young man in swim trunks appears to match the clothing Nolan had been wearing in photographs taken earlier that day aboard a boat with friends. If the identification is correct, that footage represents one of the last possible public sightings of Nolan before he disappeared. There was also Snapchat footage recorded on the island that appears to capture an argument. The existence of the video and the circumstances surrounding it have been publicly referenced, although the precise meaning of what occurred in that recording remains subject to interpretation. The broader picture is complicated by the number of boats and people moving around the island. Warren Hudson, for example, later said publicly that he was not on Nolan's boat. His account was that a large group had traveled from Ocean Springs using multiple boats. That distinction becomes important because it means that not everyone later associated with Nolan's final day necessarily witnessed the same events firsthand. Ava also enters the timeline during this period. Her house would later become the location where members of the group gathered after leaving the island. Bart was associated with another boat referenced in footage analysis by an online investigator. For now, however, the important point is simply that Horn Island was crowded, boats were coming and going, and Nolan was surrounded by a large social group. Then, sometime that afternoon, the groups began preparing to leave. According to the account later given by Jackson County Sheriff John Ledbetter, Nolan chose to remain on Horn Island. His friends said they attempted to get him to board with them. He declined. That is the account that was presented to law enforcement. And that is where the documented story of Nolan's day reaches its first critical break. Because from this point forward, the question is no longer simply what Nolan was doing on a holiday island. The question becomes what happened after the boats began leaving, who was still with him, and what was happening on the water as the afternoon moved toward evening. Those answers would depend not on a single witness, but on the phone records, GPS data, recordings, and accounts that emerged afterward. By approximately 4 p.m. on July 4th, the situation on the water had changed. The holiday crowd on Horn Island had begun to disperse, and the boat connected to Nolan Wells was no longer simply part of a busy afternoon gathering. It was experiencing a mechanical problem serious enough to trigger a call for outside assistance. According to the released recording, someone on the boat contacted Sea Tow, a private marine towing company. The audio was obtained by WLOX and CNN from the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources. The caller was a teenage male. His voice was controlled and matter-of-fact. He told the dispatcher that the boat's bilge pump had stopped working and that the vessel was taking on water. He estimated the water beneath them at approximately 31 feet. Then came another detail. There were about 7 people on board. None, the caller said, was 21 or older. He also confirmed that the group did not have a VHF radio. The dispatcher responded in a procedural manner, asking questions and gathering the information needed to send assistance. The caller provided location information near Horn Island and requested that the boat be towed back. But the audio becomes more significant when it is placed beside what Jack Spatalo later said publicly about the same situation. In his public account, Jax described the Sea Tow operator as asking too many questions and becoming frustrated. He said the call was eventually ended. According to his version, the boat then began working again. He described the trim motor coming back online and said they told someone to untie them. That account creates a problem. The released Sea Tow recording does not sound like a dispatcher losing patience with the people aboard the boat. It does not end with the kind of confrontation Jax described. Either Jax was describing a different call, or the public record does not contain the entire sequence of calls that took place during this incident. The existence of another call has been referenced in the accounts surrounding the case. According to that description, someone became frustrated with questions and ended the conversation. But that call has not been included in the official Sea Tow audio that has been publicly released. That missing piece matters because the sequence of communications can help establish what the people aboard the boat knew, what they were told, and who was communicating with whom as the afternoon unfolded. There is another detail that makes the Sea Tow recording more complicated. The boat was not necessarily isolated. Video footage referenced by an online investigator and subsequently circulated publicly appears to show a tow line being hauled in while the sea tow call was still active. In other words, the boat appears to have been physically connected to another vessel. That is important because the emergency call creates one picture. Teenagers aboard a boat near Horn Island, dealing with a failed bilge pump, taking on water and requesting a tow. The footage suggests another vessel was close enough to provide a physical connection. Yet the teenage caller did not mention that second boat during the released call. He did not tell the dispatcher that another vessel was within immediate reach. He did not identify additional people aboard a separate boat. That does not, by itself, prove that anyone was hiding information.